Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we take a closer look at the top political stories of the day. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. This is Allison Graves, Ballotpedia's Director of Communications. Thanks for being with us. I'm joined by our Editor-in-Chief, Jeff Pelle, and our Tech Director, Matt Latourell. This episode is being recorded in Chicago, where we have most of our team gathered for our annual editorial meeting. Jeff and Matt are in Chicago. I'm not. I'm calling in remote, but I can see their bright, shiny faces here, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to chat with them today about their history at Ballotpedia. This is Ballotpedia's 15th anniversary. So we've been celebrating it all year, and it's just been a really, really great way to look back on our past and successes and to look forward to the future. And it's great to have Matt and Jeff and the entire team together in Chicago so that we can have this opportunity to talk with them a little bit today. How's Chicago going so far? I hear you've got a lot of thunderstorms there.
Supposedly. Hey, Allison, wish you were here. And Matt, so good to see you in person.
It's awesome.
So yeah, it's going well so far. It's good to see everyone here, and we're excited for the week we're going to have.
We got nice and muggy for our southern...
And I brought it in from Charleston.
Yeah, so that you don't miss home too much.
We joked that we should book a summer meeting in a nice, cool location, and we thought Chicago would be it. Not this year, but that's quite all right. It's still nice.
Maybe next year on Alaska would be a place. Both of you have been with Ballotpedia. I've only been with the organization for just a little over a year. And whenever I need to talk to a veteran or get advice, I go to one or the other of you. And you've both always been so gracious about answering my questions. I'd love to chat with you a little bit about your years of experience at Ballotpedia. So why don't we start with you, Jeff, and just talk a little bit about how long you've been with Ballotpedia and what you've seen in terms of kind of major points of evolution since you joined the organization. And then we'll jump over to Matt. And then we've got some fun questions to ask both of you.
Yeah, that sounds fun. So I've been at Ballotpedia since June 2010. So pretty long time since the very beginning. Back when I joined, and Matt, this is probably the same for you, we hadn't heard of Ballotpedia when we first joined. Right. So, now also when we bring on new staff, they know Ballotpedia. Alice, in your case, you were a donor to Ballotpedia. You knew Ballotpedia very well. But when I first heard about the job opening for a staff writer, I was like, the ballot, what now? What is this thing? At the time, Ballotpedia had, I think, right around 50,000 articles total. And now we have more than 400,000. So we've come quite a long way from 2010 when it was just us doing a lot of manual keystroke editing, trying to figure out what on earth we were doing here. So, I heard about Ballotpedia just from a friend of mine knew Leslie, our CEO, and she told me that there was a job opening, and I was like, that sounds fun. I'll try that out. But what about you, Matt? I forget, how did you come into our work?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it was all through the grapevine back then.
Right.
Mine was my neighbor who was working with Leslie at one point, and I was just out of high school, and she said, oh, you want to do like a data entry job? They're looking for somebody to like type stuff into a computer. I'm like, sure, like that sounds good. Never would have thought I'd be here 15 years later on a podcast and just seeing what's come of it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think, Matt, you're, other than Leslie, the founder, are you the longest term employee? Is there anyone else out there?
I think I'm the last one left. There was 3 of us back then. So I started in 2008, just part-time. And I remember we had this somewhat big office for the 3 of us.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Very like eccentric, like lots of different companies in there as you like walk to the back. But yeah, we just, Leslie, myself and Sarah at the time, just sit there on our computers and do our thing. And it was great.
Those of us in the remote world would come in once in a while. We'd fly into Madison, and there would be this nice office with big red wall. I remember the red wall.
Yes.
And then we'd, wander around and get cheese curds. And those of us who are not from Wisconsin would learn about what life was like there. And we'd do some more data entry, go home and do more data entry in our computers. And
excellent. Yeah. Well, those jobs have certainly, both of them have certainly evolved over the years from when you both started. And Matt, I think it's so funny that you were either in or just out of high school. But one of the things that I heard is that both of you have run the gauntlet of job titles that you've held since you started at Ballotpedia. And I'd love if you could both share a little bit of information about all the different job titles you've had.
I'm really excited about this because Matt and I were talking about this right before, and we were going to have a competition. We haven't actually traded notes yet on this, but I jotted down all the job titles I can remember that I've had here, and I'm curious if Matt's going to win this. So
That's good.
I have had, I believe, 6 job titles here. How about you, Matt?
I think you might beat me, but I think I might have 5.
Some of those I gave you, I think.
5. Yeah,
so I should have given you more back then.
right.
So I was staff writer. That was my first job here. Then I became a project director for a while. Then I had a job title called Director of Research, which actually then got retired and re-brought back recently.
Right.
Josh.
Josh.
I had a Director of Special Projects job title. That was really fun, like the 2014 era. All sorts of just like a catch-all job title. Then the longest job title I had, this is a big mouth, I'm going to take a deep breath, that's the Associate Chief Content Officer.
Wow.
So that one was on with Ron. Yeah. And then now my current job title, Editor-in-Chief, that I've had since March 2015. So it's fun. I feel like we've touched almost everything at the company.
You've really held on to Editor-in-Chief, though.
That's
quite a long tenure compared to the others.
Yeah, longer. It's the longest job title I've had here. That's right. You're right. So I know where job titles I gave you along the way, but what else did you have?
My list may be less exhaustive, but I did continue with like the staff writer. I know was like the basic.
Yeah,
you're gonna pick a topic and writing about it. Then we were back in the days when we had both Ballotpedia.org and JudgePedia.org.
That's right.
I was on the JudgePedia side, which gave me a good appreciation for the local courts and the state courts and all the crazy different political stuff that happens on that side of things, which is often kind of behind the scenes. That was project director there later. And then I think from there we did the desk structure, and it was editorial services. Yeah, it was like the catch-all kind of. We had like.
But you'd like content manager on JP at one point, right? Like some kind of like in between role.
That's right. Yeah, that might have like kind of morphed a couple times.
Yeah,
there.
Yeah,
and then we brought everything back together.
Editorial services. Yeah,
I was working in the editorial.
Director of components at some point, right? Didn't you have that before or after editorial services?
To me, that blends in so much with that time period. Yeah, it was like, what are we going to do with this guy?
Yeah,
there are things to be done.
Yeah,
but. Yeah, it was fun because I got to work with Tom at the time, who was our like sole web developer.
Yeah.
I got to work with some of the quality assurance, type stuff. It was kind of a mishmash, which I guess is what you and I both like to have a variety of things going on. So
that's right.
Probably why we ended up with these roles. The director of things.
For listeners might not really. So Allison, back in it's sort of this old era of things in 2010 through 2015, we kind of call it the wikis era, when we had volunteers who could edit the site. There were guest editors, and there were all sorts of different processes and systems for updating judicial articles versus updating state legislative articles, and different teams kind of doing their own thing. So that's sort of the wikis era.
Yeah.
And then we have slowly over the years evolved the company to have a number of different, more solidified structures. So there are, more straightforward approaches and there's a database even, which is a whole story in itself.
Wow. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. I'd love to hear about all the different titles you've had over the years. And of course, just everything has evolved since then. When I joined a year ago, one of the things I noticed is that there are a lot of acronyms at Ballotpedia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as a new employee, it's a little bit hard to grasp what they all mean. And I know that you both probably invented a lot of those acronyms, but I'd love to hear a little bit about, in your time or even now at Ballotpedia, what are some of the favorite terms that we've used that you've enjoyed, or maybe even you were part of inventing?
Yeah, that's a good one. Every company, right, has their little buzzwords and their shorthand terminology. You have the SBO and the CPC and the DBT and all the different things, right? It reminds me of like high school history, the DBQs, AP classes. Oh man, those were something. Internal terms. So I think the biggest one is CPC. That's the most under the hood term for Ballotpedia, right? Like from day one, that was, do you have a CPC for that? And CPC I'll let you
Like
go.
procedure checklist.
Yeah, basically it's just documentation. Is there a recipe, a document that explains how to do that? That's probably the number one buzzword here.
Yeah.
People are
Especially working remotely, those things.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
really set us up in a good way.
That's one of the things, Ballotpedia, internally, we talk about our values and being a structure-oriented organization. And that is certainly one of the things you see when you join, and you do hear about the CPC right away. But as the person who's the director of comms for Ballotpedia, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that I think Ballotpedia, having been around for 15 years also, has really led the way in terms of being an organization that has policies that really support a remote workforce. I mean, not just in terms of people individually, but in terms of how the organization does its business. So having things like CPCs and that structure really make it so easy to be successfully remote. And the organization is a real leader in enabling successful remote work.
Yeah, and Matt and I have known each other for 13 years now, and we've never worked physically in the same proximity. And we see each other a handful of times a year, but just the way that Ballotpedia's work goes and the different times we've gotten together, I feel like it's not so dissimilar from an internal workplace. And it's like when COVID hit, we always joke that the only thing different for us before and after COVID was that kids were hanging around the house.
Right.
And they weren't before that. We've been working remotely forever, and it wasn't a new thing for us. So other organizations had to sort of adopt to that in the 2020 era. We just said, yeah, we've been ready for that.
Business as usual. Yeah, exactly. All right. So other favorite terms.
Oh, I've got one. Okay, so trifectas.
Yeah.
So
that's the big one.
In 2010, we were all sitting around and we were like, there's not really a term for single party unified government. What does it mean when one party controls this chamber and that chamber and the governorship? And we're kind of sitting around, and someone in the office just said, hey, what if we just call these trifectas? And we're like, it's like a horse racing term, I guess. But all right, whatever. Yeah, let's just do it. And we started, we built an article, trifecta. A state government trifecta is when one party controls the governorship and the state legislature. We started using that term. We'd write news articles about it, and we had our encyclopedic page on it on Ballotpedia. And here we are 13 years later, and it seems like it's a pretty commonly adopted term, and it's fun to see that happen.
Yeah.
I do appreciate that about Ballotpedia, because we care a lot about neutrality and the idea of speech tribes. And there's this thing happening in politics, and there's different, depending on what you call it, kind of gives away your position sometimes.
Yep.
So we're like, well, we're not willing to choose one of those, so we're just going to make up a word.
Yeah.
I feel like there's been a lot of fun discussions around that, of like, how do we phrase this? Like really thoughtful ones about, just kind of basic policy things that you hear in the news all the time. And it's really cool to see our editors and writers having those discussions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important to us that our readers who come to the site don't, leave thinking, this site is clearly leaning toward one side or the other. I don't like if they're using this speech tribe or that speech tribe. And the simplest way we like to describe speech tribes is, I'm from New Jersey, and if you say down the shore in New Jersey, it means I'm going to the beach. So if you're ever out in public, listeners, and you hear someone say down the shore, you can say to them, you're from New Jersey. Nowhere else says that. And you guys have something like that in the Chicago area, I'm sure, Matt.
Yeah, there's always those little local things.
Yeah, so we don't want our articles and our content to pinpoint someone's political ideology based on the terminologies they're using. That's always an evolving climate. So every now and then we feel like we have to invent a term, and that's fun.
Yeah, here in Chicago, there's a difference between down south and out south.
Oh, I
learned that. Out south means you're south side of Chicago.
Yeah.
Interesting. One of the things that you both talked about, and it's incredibly important at Ballotpedia, is the commitment to neutrality, nonpartisan ideology, and unbiased content. And you've both been talking a lot about that. I'm curious, if you ever meet somebody and you tell them you work at Ballotpedia, and every now and again you'll find somebody who hasn't heard of Ballotpedia, if they've heard of Ballotpedia, they usually thank you for the work you do. But if you haven't, and then you start telling them about the core values of the organization and what we do you ever run into people who don't believe you because they think that it is just, in this day and age, it's not even possible to maintain that neutrality, or they're just, or either they don't believe you, or they're just so grateful and they immediately say, thank you so much. You're doing such a great and important thing. Tell me what your URL is so I can go there. What's your experience around people's reaction and understanding our commitment to neutrality?
I've definitely had the negative reaction of like, are you sure? I think I remember like an Uber ride at one point, you're talking about your job or whatever. It's like, yeah, it's like a neutral encyclopedia of politics. Like, well, how does that work? Are we really, like, what's the angle, right? Like, you mentioned the word politics, and so like you got
tell me what you really think, though, right?
Yeah. It's like the nonpartisan, the neutral war or whatever, right? But yeah, I always find those kind of like interesting discussions. I'm like, no, I mean, you should see how many pages of documentation we have around different types of bias.
It's come a long way. It's been interesting. In the early years, what I remember I used to get a lot was Ballotpedia. I've come across that. There's people there? I just thought it was like a bunch of bots or robots or something. That's people running that site? I didn't know that. So that's what it was in the sort of 2010, 2012 era. Now I get mostly, wow, it must be really hard. And I usually nod my head and go, yeah, but it's worthwhile.
Yeah, rewarding.
So pretty much everybody says we're in a more polarized time than ever in our country's history. And so when you two look back on your time at Ballotpedia, because in your roles and in the organization overall, that polarization and making sure that we don't, that we're neutral around that is a really big challenge. Do you feel as though what the rest of society is feeling right now, that polarization, do you feel that as well? And has that changed? Has that changed your jobs?
One of the neat ways I think that Matt and I especially get to experience this now is with the interaction between tech and writing. So Ballotpedia has evolved so much over the years and has become much more of a tech-driven, data-driven website. So neutrality is not necessarily just the words that you put on the page anymore, but it's also the data that you collect and the research processes and structures you have around how you collect that data and information. So there's an interaction between the sort of the written word and the structured data. And both of those have to sort of collaboratively work together to really achieve your goals of bias-free, neutral content. That is very different, I think, than our early years, where I think most of the focus was just around the written word. We didn't really even think about the data part of it. So those two sort of welding together, I think, has been pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I think too, like with that idea, like the focus on what article am I writing right now? What words am I putting down right now? Are those okay or not, right? Versus now we can look at like our data set and our website as a whole, like almost 500,000 articles, and now analyze it, right? So you have like this perspective of zoomed out. Okay, like this is where our coverage is, like, the topics and the people and that sort of thing from a broader perspective is kind of interesting. You get to do that with tools. But I haven't felt like the work has changed on our end too much, because I think the culture, internally has remained pretty strong along those lines. And I feel like part of it is we're just nerds enough about it, right? Where it's like we actually kind of enjoy the nuances of like how the elections work or how the policies are made, and like kind of like the like how the sausage is made of politics versus like what flavor sausage is. And
if anything, the polarization that you're talking about, Allison, has really led to, I think, a furtherance of the need for Ballotpedia. So for us, I think we always talk internally, it makes us, respect and appreciate our readers even more because we know that there are fewer and fewer sources like us during this time. So the ones who are coming to Ballotpedia are curious by nature, and they are really excited to come to find us, and that motivates us to make sure we're putting out the product that's going to staff and they're looking for, because it's harder to find than maybe it used to be.
Right.
Great. So both of you a moment ago talked about the database. Do you want to give me a little bit of that? That's such a integral part of the organization. Tell me a little bit more. Tell our listeners a little bit more about the origin of the database.
2016 was a pretty seminal year in Ballotpedia for that. So before 2016, and this might surprise some listeners, that there was no true database for Ballotpedia's content. Ballotpedia is based on MediaWiki, which is like what Wikipedia is run on, which means you can edit the articles directly. The text just goes straight onto the page. So in 2016, and I'm curious if Matt remembers it the same way, but what I remember was Matt coming to me with our tech sort of chief editor at the time, Tom, and saying, "Hey, Jeff, we want to have a meeting for a day and talk to you about building a Ballotpedia database." And I said, "Yeah, that sounds interesting. Let's talk about it." And then here we are, and oh my gosh, millions of database entries and and everything else. So it's evolved quite a bit over the years, and each day, each month, each year, the database becomes more and more integral to our processes and our content that we produce, and it powers the website now. And readers can't see it, but it makes our jobs easier. It makes the content a higher quality product because we're able to have so many different incredible database QA systems to clean up the data. So the database was a really big leverage point. It grew out of 2016. And I just remember that fateful day. And it not far from here in St. Charles, I think, Illinois, or something like that. So what do you remember that?
Yeah, it is sort of the natural progression of an encyclopedia, which is kind of all about how you organize that content, right? So people can find it. And so a database is just a good way to organize content, data.
Yeah.
So I was really appreciative of like the insights of people earlier on who like steered us in that direction. So when you build a website, especially you're just starting out, let me just like put up a simple website, start typing in some stuff, see how it goes, right? So you just have to continue to modernize over time. It has been really cool what that's allowed us to do. I remember for me in 2014, I wasn't necessarily thinking of the database, but there's a pivotal moment when I think I was challenged maybe for the project I was working on to get election results updated for these judges within a certain amount of time. A very short amount of time.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, that's cool. Like, I love a good challenge. Like, but I don't know that we can do that. Like, this is thousands of pages that I'd have to go through one by one and like type in like the vote totals and things. And so we, constructed some elaborate, little more technical like templates and things that helped prevent us from having to input every single record for every single candidate, where you would imagine, okay, well, if I could put it in once per race, right? That maybe cuts out if there's 3 candidates in the race, cuts it by a third. And to me now, looking at what we want to do with the database, part of it is that, right? It's just streamlining the research processes. And I feel like that's really what we've been trying to like, and what we have been improving over the years at Ballotpedia is we have this really core competency of research and, like I said, being nerds about politics.
Yeah.
And so then it's just bringing along modern tools to make that even better. And, we have a big dream to do that across the country. And so we need to, and anything we can do to make that better for our readers is good.
Yeah, Matt and I always joke that if we're building fences over here, the tech team is helping us with better shovels to make these dig the holes and put those fences in, because it's there's a lot of fences to build. There's a lot of election results to cover, a lot of political information to research, and the database is a huge tool that helps us do that. And to non political, more techie sites, it might seem very obvious. So of course you have a database, but for us, Ballotpedia, so many of our early staff, some of our researchers were, we weren't focused on data-driven work. I was a journalist by my background. Databases were not really a thing. So it's been really fun to see the growth internally of blending together the technical background and having a technical team with a research team and how they sort of work, together harmoniously.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that information. So we're going to start to wrap up. I have one last question for both of you. We could go on for such a long time reminiscing about the last 15 years and the big changes and the evolution and the exciting things that you've seen, the fun that you've had. I'm curious to know, as Ballotpedia looks into the future, for both of you, what are your big dreams and aspirations for Ballotpedia, not just for 2024 and the presidential election, which that's big enough, but 2024 and beyond. We'll start with you, Jeff.
Good question. And I kind of just alluded to it a little bit, but I think where I really see us heading in the exciting territory for us is the technical team working with the editorial team and how we're going to, work together to cover all 585,000 elected officials at scale. It's just not something that you can do with the research protocols and systems we had before. If we want to keep going and cover every elected official in the country, we're going to need technical solutions. But we need to blend that with manual research and building articles and understanding the electoral landscape. It ties in the biggest question we've always had in these conversations is breadth and depth. We want to cover as many elections as we can. That's the breadth of coverage. But we want to go in depth as much as we can in all of these races. We want to understand, why are people running and what are their issues that they care about? And who's endorsing them? Who's giving campaign funding to the various candidates? The more in depth we can go, the better. And the more technical solutions we can have to all of that, the sort of better off we're going to be. So I'm really excited to see how our company and how Ballotpedia will grow with both technical solutions and just, basic continued elections research. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I think we're only just really starting to scratch the surface with it. So What do you see, Matt?
Yeah, definitely. The goal of covering all elections in the country. I mean, some people hearing that might already think, well, that's already a thing, right? I could go somewhere and get that.
Right.
Depending on where you live, that's not always easy to come by. And even if you can find who is running in your area, which again, sometimes not so easy to come by from like official sources, like you said, the depth, like how do I decide between these people, right?
It's not enough to have just a name on the ballot.
I recently left, or I moved from one of the top 100 cities, which we do a lot of depth of coverage in right now, to a smaller town just outside of Chicago here. And in the past school board race, it was, the eye-opening for that of like what we're trying to do at the local level. Okay, I was able to find the candidates. I have a little bit of an edge, I suppose, in terms of like figuring out where to look for those things, maybe.
Yeah.
But, figuring out who to choose and like getting enough data about what they stand for, their like, positions on things. I'm really excited for, like you said, like both sides of that, and not only scaling out and going really deep into these like small towns and things, and what elections are they having, and like what are the interesting things there, which again, it has to come from like new tools, which I always find exciting. I get front row seat to all of that for what we're doing here at the company, which is really cool. I think we're going to have a lot of new capabilities, but you always have to pair it with research, and sometimes you got to pick up the phone and make phone calls and things. So yeah, I'm really excited for reaching that goal, and then there's plenty of work to do to get information about those candidates. Like we're surveying them and trying to hear from, present their opinions in their own words to voters. I think having that data collected is going to be really useful to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's the old phrase, all politics is local. And there's an incredible dearth of information about local elections. But, that's the vast majority of elected officials in the country. So there's a huge opportunity for someone to come in and start providing that coverage. And we're excited to get into that.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think we've covered the last 15 years as best we can in the time we've had together. And thank you both so much. I'm hoping that when it's Ballotpedia's 20th anniversary, we'll have the opportunity to come back together and do this again.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this time reminds me of the expression, the days are long and the years are short. There's a lot of ground to cover, and the future for Ballotpedia and for both of you looks bright. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Allison. It's good to see you. And this is fun, Matt.
Yeah, it's awesome.
We started Ballotpedia with no kids. Now we both have 2 kids. So lots changed for us during our time here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And for our listeners, you can learn more about our Fellows program, which is really exciting, by checking out the links in our show notes. Make sure to subscribe to On the Ballot wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Allison Graves, and thank you so much for listening.